80-55-55, bit of a false ending there, wasn't it? The chief rabbi has accused Labour of failing the Jewish community by not expelling Ken Livingstone. The former mayor of London was suspended from the party for 2 years on Tuesday for comments he made about the alleged historical connections between Adolf Hitler and the Zionist movement. Let's remind you, excuse me, let me remind you of what Ken Livingstone got himself into trouble over. Last April, you'll remember, he was interviewed on the BBC London Vanessa Feltz show. He was defending the Labour MP Naz Shah over accusations of anti-Semitism she was facing at the time when he said this.
Let's remember, when Hitler won his election in 1932, his policy then was that Jews should be moved to Israel. He was supporting Zionism. His boy went mad and ended up killing 6 million Jews. But the simple fact in all of this is that Naz made these comments at a time when there's another brutal Israeli attack on the Palestinians. And there's one stark fact that virtually no one in the British media ever reports. In almost all these conflicts, the death toll is usually between 60 and 100 Palestinians killed for every Israeli. Now, any other country doing that would be accused of war crimes, but it's like we have a double standard about the policies of the Israeli government.
So that was the comment Ken Livingstone made at the time. It outraged many people, you'll remember. Some even thought he was claiming that Adolf Hitler was a Zionist. He never said that, of course. He claimed that Hitler, for his own strategic reasons in the early 1930s, was supportive of some parts of the Zionist movement. Mr. Livingstone stands by that claim. So now he's been suspended from the Labour Party for 2 years. The chief rabbi says the decision to suspend him rather than to throw him out of the party completely yet again shows that the Labour Party is not sufficiently serious about tackling the scourge of anti-Semitism within their own ranks. Ken Livingstone, for his part, last night gave this reaction.
The panel have decided that I should be suspended for 1 more year, and during that time I can't stand for Parliament or my local council.
What's your reaction?
Well, I expected them to expel me, so I've now got to consider whether I challenge this legally or just live with it.
So what's the point?
There's an issue here that matters. Should someone be disciplined for stating a historical truth? And I think that's really important. I'm not going to make an immediate decision, but we've got to sit around and think about this to my lawyers.
Have other historians dispute your version of the truth? Will you apologise for the offence that people say you've caused?
I apologise for the offence caused by those Labour MPs who lied and said I said Hitler was a Zionist.
You still do not recognise that you have caused offence?
Hang on.
Do you recognise you caused offence?
Hang on, I can't hear you all at once.
That was Ken Livingstone last night. We're joined by Douglas Murray from The Spectator. He's in our Westminster studio. And Christopher Stolford from the DUP in our Stormont studio. Gentlemen, welcome. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Douglas, first of all, what do you make of it?
Well, it's a Labour Party disciplinary matter as to what they wish to do with Mr Livingstone. It seems obvious to me that you can't believe that the Labour Party is particularly tough on anti-Semitism, not because of the way in which it's treated Ken Livingstone, but because of the fact that their leader is Jeremy Corbyn. And, this is in a way a sort of sideshow of the Labour Party's internal woes, which cannot be solved by expelling or suspending one person.
Do you think he should have been expelled? You're entitled to have a view on it, obviously.
I think this is a matter for the Labour Party. I think he's... one of the things, I've written a piece about this for The Spectator this week, one thing which I think is striking in all this is the following. Ken Livingstone is totally wrong on his history. I mean, really badly wrong. In my piece, I explained that the particular historian that he's relied on, or sort of Marxist, the non-historian really, he's relied on for his pseudo-history. But what's interesting about it to me, and where I say, in a way, I sort of recognise a sort of nobility in what Ken Livingstone is doing, despite disagreeing with him absolutely on all of the conclusions he's come to, is that he keeps on being asked. He's been asked for the last year repeatedly to apologise for offending people, and Ken Livingstone repeatedly has insisted that he's not seeking to cause offence. He's seeking to argue about history. And one of the things I think is so striking is how few interviewers over the last year have actually challenged him on the history. That is what should be done. And instead, I'm afraid we have this shortcut thing always of, will you apologise because you've caused offence to people? When in actual fact, there should be a debate about the fact that he is wrong on his history.
You say he's wrong in the history, and many historians, very distinguished historians, have said that as well. There are others, though, who say it is the case that in the early 1930s, it is the case, some have suggested, in the early 1930s, that Hitler, for his own strategic reasons, wanted to get the Jews out of his space, the space in Europe, and was prepared to do any deal to make that happen. Whether that's historically true or not, I can't comment. I'm not an historian. But some have suggested as much.
Which historians are you relying on there?
Well, I mean, I looked, for example, in the Morning Star today. They have a Holocaust survivor. I had an historian who said that this is partially true. The question is whether partial truths should get you expelled from the Labour Party.
Sure, absolutely. I really wouldn't fall back on the Morning Star, if I can say so, for historical veracity. But look, the bit that I say in my piece in Spectator, the bit of this that is why we should be debating history, is that it is true that there were meetings between members of the Labour Zionist movement in the early 1930s and some representatives of the Nazi Party. Now, Lenny Brenner, the Marxist historian that Livingstone relies upon, and Livingstone himself believe these were clandestine meetings that only they know about. That's not true, for a start. These are well known about. The second thing is that they come to totally the wrong conclusions about these meetings. The meetings were taking place on the part of the Labour Zionist representatives in order to try to get Jews and some Jews with their possessions out of Germany before the catastrophe. This misreading, this misrepresentation of the historical facts, that this was in fact some kind of complicity and that in some way, the Nazis were proto-Zionists. There's a reason, this is very important, there's a reason why this argument gets made on the far left. It gets made because there is a concerted historical effort to claim that the Zionist state, the state of Israel, the one and only Jewish state in the world, is in fact some kind of Nazi state. And the Lenny Brenner School of History seeks to claim this from the origins in order that they can delegitimize the state of Israel in the present. It's very insidious, but it needs to be tackled on the facts.
And many people will be saying, of course, many historians will be saying we need to emphasise the fact that Hitler despised not just the Jews, but the Zionist movement, no matter what his strategies were. Christopher Stallford, on the contemporary events, not the history, do you think this is an expulsion matter?
Well, I mean, I believe in freedom of speech, but I do also believe that in the course of human events, the Holocaust and the events leading up to it represent a singular horror in human history, and therefore the subject needs to be broached in a sensitive and an informed manner. I don't think Ken Livingstone has broached the subject in an informed manner. And I think his comments, as the previous contributor said, Douglas said, I think his comments are demonstrative of a moral paradigm shift that has taken place in left politics in this country, that we have reached the bizarre, frankly, situation where senior members of the Labour Party, which was the party in government at the time that the Israeli state was founded, senior members of the Labour Party have now reached the strange position of asking us to take a different understanding of the motives of Adolf Hitler. And this is the position that visceral hatred of the Israeli state has driven some people in the Labour Party to. And the really sad and tragic thing is that the people who were once that extreme fringe within the Labour Party, the sort of George Galloways and Jeremy Corbyns and Ken Livingstones of this world, they're now in charge of the Labour Party. Mm-hmm. This is Her Majesty's official opposition. The lunatics
Ken Livingstone's not in charge of anything. He's suspended.
But he's is he? Has he been suspended from his review? Well, wait a second. Has he been relieved of his duties in terms of the review of Labour's defence policy?
My understanding is that he's suspended from every official role within the Labour Party.
Okay. Well, I would be interested just to have that clarified. But, I mean, we've literally reached a situation in terms of the official opposition in this country whereby the lunatics have taken over the asylum. And we don't have a credible opposition. And instead of the Labour government or the Labour opposition holding the government to account, and I disagreed with lots of the policies the Labour Party stands for, but instead of the government facing a credible opposition, instead we have Her Majesty's opposition spending its time talking about the details of German history in the 1930s. I mean, this is incredulous. And this is the point that the people around Jeremy Corbyn and his circle have taken the main opposition party in this country too.
Can I just confirm that Emily Thornberry is now heading up that review of the defence, and that happened in December when some of this stuff started to emerge. So that's already happened. He's already been sidelined.
Well, that's fair enough. But I mean, I think as well, there are members of Parliament, Labour members of Parliament, not only people who come from a Jewish background, but I mean, the left is supposed to stand for the sort of empowerment and protection of minority communities. And it seems that for some on the left, that it is perfectly acceptable to behave in this brutish and insensitive way towards a community that has suffered thousands of years of persecution.
Douglas, it does raise some questions for us about free speech, doesn't it? Because some of these issues are historically interesting, and they're slightly academic, we should say. Obviously, there are issues today with the state of Israel and with anti-Semitism on the rise across Europe and all the rest. But we need to be very careful about that. But some of these are quite academic points. Is this the kind of thing that should earn someone expulsion, or should they be sent to a library to get a new book out?
That's a very interesting question. And as I say, my only point of defence, as it were, for Ken Livingstone is that I think that historical untruths should be countered by historical truths, that historical inaccuracy should be countered. Exactly. Should be countered by historical accuracy. That is what is so massively missing in this. But, you know, the thing that is so striking about this, as we've just heard, is that this is not a Ken Livingstone issue. This is a Labour Party issue. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn, aside from the fact that some of our feelings about his involvement during the period of the Troubles and his incredible amount of support, I mean, I still find it astonishing that somebody is in his position who gave the levels of support he did to Sinn Féin IRA at the height of the Troubles. But even if you didn't care about that, and sadly a lot of people seem not to care about that anymore, look at what Jeremy Corbyn has done over the same period and right up to the time he took over the Labour leadership in relation to the Middle East. It's exactly the same thing. He pretends that he was involved in some kind of peace process between Israel and the Palestinians, as he pretends that he was leading the peace process between the British state and Sinn Féin IRA. It's absolute rubbish. He was supporting one side. He was supporting and has always supported one side in the case of Northern Ireland, and he has always supported one side in the Middle East. You know, every single crazy anti-Semitic troublemaker and terrorist in the Middle East who's against Israel has consistently had Jeremy Corbyn on their side. And now he pretends that he was just the sort of advanced guard of the sort of quartet peace deal. He was no such thing. And as I say, they can't deal with Livingstone. They can't expel him because the leader of the Labour Party believes almost all of the things that Livingstone believes, and some things even worse. So, you know, of course, and I find it, as I say, a final point is I find it particularly regrettable that a new generation of left-wing MPs and others, instead of tackling these people, consistently use the current snowflakey generation thing of saying, I'm offended, or he's offended, or she's offended. Offence matters, but in what matters more is that you tackle historical untruths and current untruths. And that's what I do not see happening in the current generation of the left, who fall back on the usual thing of, I'm upset, boo-hoo. Grow up. Fight these people.
Eamon in Belfast has asked the question, did Ken state an untruth by saying what he said? Let's try to tease this out a little bit.
Yes, he did.
It's simply not the case that Adolf Hitler was a Zionist. Simply not the case. He despised Jews, he despised Zionists. That's on the record, that's clear. Ken Livingstone did not claim that Adolf Hitler was a Zionist, but he did say he supported Zionists. He might have said, Douglas, he might have said more accurately, when it suited him in the early 30s, he used anybody, including Zionists, for his own ends. That's not the same thing as saying you're supporting them.
Well, we know from history and from the study of that period that the Holocaust effectively emerged from the administrative chaos of the German state, which the Nazis presided over. But we also know from the historical record, from as early as the publication of Mein Kampf and before, that Adolf Hitler was committed to a Jew-free world. And when people talk, for example, about the so-called Madagascar plan, where the German authorities were going to move European Jewry to Madagascar,
right.
They weren't going to relocate European Jewry to Madagascar in terms of creating a sustainable society for them to live in. They were moving them to an island to basically starve them to death and die of disease.
And that's hardly a description of supporting Zionism.
Zionism, precisely.
Right.
And similarly, in the context of... we must also remember that, whilst mercifully it didn't come to pass, the ultimate Nazi plan was one of world domination. So whilst it might be a case that 66,000 Jews were moved out of Europe in the context of I can't remember the term, the agreement that was reached, it might be true that
the Hafara agreement, I think.
Yes,
yeah.
yes. Ultimately, the ultimate German design for the world was that Germany would rule the world. And in the context of ruling the world, they may well have been outside the German sphere of influence for a period of time, but once that sphere of influence caught up with them, there's no question of what the German authorities plan to do with the Jewish people.
All right, let me go to the
to
phone
murder
lines. Let's get, sorry to bring in there, Chris. Let's go to Paddy first of all. Paddy in West Belfast. Hi, Paddy.
How you doing? I put a question, when he says that the Germans wanted to rule the world is where they were, not the complete world. And it depends on what historical facts you want actually to believe in. I rang up basically to say that if I was to claim that the IRA trained the Israeli army, would that be believed? Would someone believe that?
I don't think so.
Well, that's correct, yes. And the rabbi who brought them over was known as the Sinn Féin rabbi. And they put a plaque outside his door in Clifton Park Avenue. He was known as the Sinn Féin rabbi. And he brought them over and they trained it against the British.
I thought it was a British Army officer who was involved in the early training of the Israeli army.
Well, he may have been part of the British Army when they went to Israel. What I'm saying to you as a fact, and it all depends on what you want to believe, they trained the Israeli army.
Well, I know that Chaim Herzog, the first president of Israel, born in Dublin, lived in Belfast. There was a blue plaque on the house where he lived.
That's right.
And unfortunately, because of the rising tide of anti-Semitism linked to the rising tide of the hatred of the Israeli state, the plaque had to be removed. And that's the reality of where we're at. Where we're at today is that for many people on the left, for many people on the political left, the only acceptable form of racism in this world is hatred directed towards Jews.
And can I add to that? There's a very interesting historical phenomenon which the Livingstone case has allowed us to get into, which is that there has been a presumption in recent decades, pushed, I have to say, by elements of the left, that anti-Semitism is a purely right-wing, even conservative virus, and that it is the right that pushes it. Of course, everybody who knows anything about anti-Semitism knows that it can come from the left as much as it can come from the right, and that the left-wing effort to make anti-Semitism a sin of the right is simply an attempt to win political points by the left. But you consider the following as well. You see, everybody knows, I think, the existence of a sort of far-right anti-Semitic Holocaust denialism. That element of the far right has always sought to claim either that the Holocaust didn't happen or that they diminish the numbers so as to, for instance, as David Irving does, try to bring them down to the same levels as were, for instance, killed in the bombing of Dresden. But there is also, we know about this is a fairly well-known phenomenon of the far right. But what I think this has brought up is the phenomenon of the left and of far left-wing anti-Semitism, which does something different, which is the Marxist form of anti-Semitism, primarily that came from Russia after the war, which seeks not to claim that the Holocaust didn't happen, but that the Jews themselves were involved in the Holocaust and were complicit in it. Now, this is, of course, equally crazy, equally mad, equally evil, but I think this is a very important learning moment for everybody, that this can come as much from the left as it can from the right, and, as I say, epitomised by the fact that the Labour Party is currently led by who it's led by.
I want to take our conversation also into those red lines. What is the difference between Zionism, anti-Semitism, and the difference between bigotry and a political stance that may be critical of, for example, the actions of the contemporary state of Israel. We'll go there now and widen this. Michael will get us there. Michael's in Limavady.
William, thank you. I've asked this question over the last 2 decades. I actually had a wee stint in a kibbutz many years ago in the 80s. Didn't get an answer then. What's the difference? I mean, I'm from here. What is the difference? And another thing...
What is the difference between what?
Between anti-Semitism and old-fashioned bigotry. Just disliking the people that are different to you. What's the difference? Why is anti-Semitism set on a higher level? And I don't have any time and truck for that, believe me.
Well, is it set on a higher level than, say, racism generally?
It's got its own title. People discuss it in hushed tones, but I mean, just people being horrible to other people because they're different, it's the same thing in my opinion.
Prejudice,
Can I just jump in here and say, we are in the sidelines waiting for whatever it takes to take Jeremy Corbyn down. We're just waiting, and that to me, that's democracy, because we know he's not the right type in the wrong job, and they're going to get him some way, and that's my opinion, and a lot of my friends feel the same.
All right, just don't say we, because there are a lot of people disagree with you.
Well, can I just, on that point, I mean, personally, I think that if there is an election and Corbyn leads Labour into that election, I think Labour Party will be coming back with less than 160 seats. I think he will lead them to a humiliating defeat.
You know that.
There is an important...
He suspects that.
Yeah, there is an important point in terms of... I mean, anti-Semitism is a problem that historically has affected all 3 major parties. I mean, for example, Leslie Hoare-Belisha was a Tory cabinet minister in the 30s. His colleagues nicknamed him Horeb Elisha and made fun of him because of his Jewish background. You know, sure. Some of the comments that were made by Lib Dem peeress Jenny Tong in the past about understanding why people become suicide bombers and stuff like that. But what I would say in terms of the genesis of this controversy arose out of the comments made by Naz Shah MP. To her credit,
she apologised, yeah.
She said sorry, and I mean, I don't believe that people should be completely written off if they say something that's wrong and they apologise. And she didn't only apologise for offence, she apologised and recognised her own ignorance and committed.
And I get that. And Ken Livingstone is not apologising, Christopher, because he's saying, even if I'm wrong about this, I may be wrong in the history of this, correct me. But it's not anti-Semitic to be wrong on a historical fact, is it?
No, but the difference is that Livingstone has form.
What's
William,
the form?
Well, the occasion, for example, when he referred to Jewish reporters looking like a concentration camp guard. I mean, that's not about historical fact. That's just being egregiously
And he does seem
offensive.
to refer to Hitler an awful lot in interviews, doesn't he?
Yes.
Over the years.
If I could leap in on this, firstly to answer your caller's question, the reason why is a very straightforward reason why anti-Semitism is viewed with slightly more horror, as it were.
Yeah, it's called the Holocaust, isn't it?
And it's called the Holocaust, and it had happened in living memory, and it almost wiped out the Jewish people. And that's why I come back to this point. This is why this thing matters so much for the anti-Zionists. It matters so much to claim that the one and only Jewish state in the world is a Nazi state, because it means that the Jewish people can effectively be freed up for that again. This is a very, very deep sickness on the left and the far left of politics at the moment. Just quickly, though,
there's a lot of anti-Semitism on the right too.
Well, I have to say, of course it exists, but, find me Conservative Party MPs or peers, anything like Jenny Tong, anything like what Naz Shah said, anything like what Ken Livingstone says. I'm sorry to correct you on this, but, and I'm not a party political person myself, the Conservative Party seems to have dealt with any anti-Semitism problems and to have kept its house clean and in order. That is not the case with the Liberal Democrat Party. It is clearly not the case with the Labour Party. And just quickly, this Naz Shah point needs to be reiterated because, again, she was found disseminating anti-Semitic things on social media, and she did what is now, and I'm sorry to be cynical about this, but she did now what is the normal thing. You have a meeting with Jewish representatives, you help launder your reputation, you make an apology, you say you're sorry, and then you just continue your career. You know, it's a roadblock you've got to get over. I don't know whether she's sincere or not, but I am slightly suspicious of people when they do U-turns that fast. And
I just point out, I
change.
take your point entirely, Douglas, that the Tory party have been prepared to hit hard on examples of anti-Semitism or racism within its ranks. You can make that point. It's not the case that there haven't been examples. I've got 27 examples published in the Mirror in front of me right now, not least, you remember the Tory MP Aidan Burley, who helped to organise a Nazi-themed stag party. But there was an apology. There was part. Well, many people regarded that as anti-Semitic.
Okay. I mean, we do have to be specific on that. Aidan Burley was clearly an absolute prat and so on, but I don't think anyone's claimed that he was actually a Nazi. Have they?
No, I don't think so, but he apologised for that.
And the party rightly took a very strong line on such a prattish person doing such an offensive thing. But, I mean, that is really nothing like, as I say, I don't hold a candle for any political party, but that is nothing like the Labour Party being led by a man who has spent his career dealing with and chumming up with Holocaust deniers in the UK, anti-Semites in the UK. And
he would deny that he's chummed up with Holocaust deniers. He certainly doesn't support Holocaust denial.
Well, he referred to Hamas as our friends.
He referred to Hamas and Hezbollah as our friends. Hamas and Hezbollah are, from their origins up to the present, committed to the eradication of the Jewish people. The Hamas Charter is the charter that Adolf Hitler would have wished somebody to come up with after his death.
All right, let me go back to the phone line. Sorry to break in.
Eradicating all Jews.
That was my fault. I led you down that path. But let me go back to the phone lines. Here's Brian, who's in Finnegy. Hi, Brian.
Good afternoon. Yes, there's so much, William, so much hypocrisy knocking about. It's unbelievable. I mean, there's some people who would argue that the people who created anti-Semitism was the Zionists themselves, and I don't know if that's true or not, if that's a historical fact, but some people would say that. But what annoys me is the paranoia and the siege mentality of Jewish people. You can't criticise a Jew, and if you do, you're anti-Semitic. I mean, going back to Ken Irwin.
What kind of criticism do you have in mind? You mean criticising Israel or criticising Jewish people?
If I turn around and I say to some of your speakers on today, would they condemn what Netanyahu is doing to the Palestinians today on the West Bank and the Gaza Strip? Would they condemn that outright without prevaricating? Would they condemn that?
And if you did condemn it, it wouldn't make you anti-Semitic, would it, Douglas?
No, of course it wouldn't. But, I mean, you'd have to know what you were talking about. I mean, you talked about the siege mentality of Israel. I don't know if you've ever been to Israel or the wider Middle East. If you had gone, you might notice why there might be a siege mentality that exists in the one and only Jewish state. And it's because, for instance, on its northern border in Lebanon, Hezbollah has amassed once again tens of thousands of rockets to fire into Israel, as they did in 2006, as I saw with my own eyes. It might be because on another border, the border with Syria and the Golan Heights, there's regular fire at Israel from the Syrian side, which includes ISIS. It might be because time and again throughout its history since its founding in 1948, every one of its neighbours has tried to invade Israel and wipe it out from the face of the earth. It might be because on the Gaza border you have Hamas, which, as I say, from its charter is dedicated to the annihilation of world Jewry, and which consistently attempts over the years to fire rockets into all civilian centres in Israel. I'm sorry to sound like I'm a paranoid myself, but if somebody kept on firing rockets at my house, I would also be kind of paranoid by this stage.
Okay, Brian, thank you very much, sir. Sorry, Brian, I got to move. We've got so many people who want to get on this. Caitlin's in West Belfast. Hey, Caitlin.
Yes.
You're a member of the Labour Party.
Yes, I was a member of the Labour Party in London, and I knew Ken Livingstone personally. And what I can absolutely stand on is that Ken Livingstone has not got a racist bone in his body. Not only that, but when he was leader of the London Council, he actually decided to spend money on producing reports on various ethnic minorities in London who might be victims of racism. So the thing is, his track record is that he has fought racism and indeed anti-Semitism all his life, as has Jeremy Corbyn. That's point number one. Point number two, this is not about history or what Adolf Hitler, where he stood on the Jewish question. What this is really about, that the people who have endeavoured to get Ken Livingstone expelled from the Labour Party don't like his politics, don't like his defence of Palestinian human rights. That's what's behind this, and that also explains the hostility towards Jeremy Corbyn. It's political. The whole question of anti-Semitism is a huge diversion.
Christopher, you want to take up that point? It's a witch hunt, essentially, against Ken Livingstone because of his politics.
But I don't accept that. I think if this had been a one-off comment, you could probably stand over that. But, I mean, Ken Livingstone, as I give another example, Ken Livingstone has form, going back to his second term as Mayor of London, in terms of the nature of his comments. I think increasingly, as I said, the hard left is now in complete control of the Labour Party. And I think you look at people like Lisa Nandy, MP, Luciana Berger, different Labour members of Parliament, have it described in detail the type of bullying and intimidation that they have been on the receiving end of from some of the people. Not all of them, to be fair, but from some of the people who support the present leadership. And I think it's reflective of a culture of intolerance that surrounds the leadership of the present leadership of the Labour Party, that demands complete and utter ideological purity and adherence to every one of their shibboleths. And one of their greatest shibboleths is a hatred of the Israeli state.
Absolutely.
And if you do not adhere to that, then they will go after you.
All right, and they're not here to take. They're not here taking part in this discussion, but they would say it's not a hatred of the Israeli state. They are critiquing the actions of the Israeli state over a period of time. That is the other side that they would put.
William, could I come back?
Please do, Caitlin.
Hello, William.
Yeah, go ahead, Caitlin.
Well, the point I'd like to make is that some of the strongest critics of the Israeli policy towards the Palestinians in particular, are Jewish people.
Yes,
Jewish
absolutely.
academics, Noam Chomsky, and also Jewish people living within the state of Israel, who, despite a lot of persecution, they still stand up and are attempting to defend Palestinian rights.
Could I just ask, what's the persecution that a Jew in Israel who disagrees with government policy gets happen to them?
Well, I suggest you go and ask people like Gideon Levy, the journalist, ask people like Ilan Pappé.
What is the persecution that a Jew in Israel who doesn't agree with the government goes through?
Well, some of them have been physically attacked. They've been
by the government?
Well, who would know who is doing it?
I see.
The thing is that Jewish people who have come here to speak about the denial of rights to Palestinians have described how they do it under peril of their lives at times.
I can tell you that is absolute and arrant nonsense. But I tell you, if you don't believe me...
You're saying that somebody like Gideon Levy is speaking nonsense. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And Ilan Pappé even more so, has throughout his career.
Well, excuse me, why should we take your word for it?
Well, you don't have to. You can simply try to look at the facts and weigh up a range of opinions. But I tell you another thing. If you want to really look, first of all, I've never heard of a case in Israel, and I've been there many times. I've been all around the surrounding countries. I've never heard of a case where, for instance, the government actually persecutes or approves of the persecution of people who disagree with government policy. My God, if you read Haaretz or any other Israeli paper any morning, you'll see that they criticize the government every single day because, like this country, it's a free country with a free press. But if you go a few miles the other way, if you go into Gaza, or indeed if you go into the West Bank, look at what happens to people who disagree just with the PA, never mind Hamas. Palestinians who disagree with the Palestinian Authority. There you are talking about persecution. There you definitely
are. Let's give Caitlin a brief response, please, Caitlin.
The basic question is that the Israeli state has an absolutely disgraceful policy towards Palestinians.
Can I ask
No, we've got to hear Caitlin's point.
The question of anti-Semitism is being used to divert away from that basic fact.
I'm afraid you're being used.
We've got to hear her point. She's allowed to express her view as well. Caitlin.
Yeah. Hello?
Caitlin, make your point. We were talking over you.
Yes. I mean, the United Nations and very many credible organizations have produced report upon report upon report criticising the state of Israel. Are you trying to say that they're all anti-Semitic?
No, I'm not. Not in the least.
Also criticise the state of Israel.
Nobody.
Can I ask Caitlin just a fundamental question?
Very briefly, both ways.
Caitlin, do you believe in the absolute right of the state of Israel to exist?
The state of Israel exists, and of course I accept it. Yes.
You do believe in the right?
It doesn't exist, however, in the way that it was meant to under the 1947-48 agreement.
Yes.
In other words, the Israeli state has expanded beyond the borders which were originally designated.
So, firstly, can I say I welcome the fact that you recognise the right of the state of Israel to exist. There are many people, including some of the people that you have referenced, who unfortunately do not
Ken
recognise
Livingstone
that right.
recognises the right of the state of Israel to exist as well.
Although he does say he wishes it hadn't been created.
Last call on this, Harry in Macrofeld.
Well, you mentioned witch hunt a few moments ago, and, this really needs to be put into context with what's really happening, the political vendetta that's now been imposed upon the left. The real reason of getting Ken Livingstone out, just Ken Livingstone, of course, comes from an anti-nuclear background. He was part of the Defence Review, and that first and foremost was aimed to get him out of that body and that committee to run that.
He opposed Trident,
Yeah. But secondly, what's going on is, an attack to undermine the likes of Len McCluskey, who's running for General Secretary of Unite, and McCluskey himself is a very staunch supporter of Corbyn. There's also the attacks that's going on in the movement, which is No Momentum, which is backing up the Labour leader.
Yeah.
And there are trying and attempts to undermine Momentum as well. Not, of course, to forget the numerous attempts to undermine Jeremy Corbyn himself, the right-wing media campaign. What's the outcome of the next election?
Harry, I get all of that, but why does Ken Livingstone keep referencing Hitler in comments and interviews and speeches?
Well, it is what you've mentioned there. It is a half-truth, and you need very, very little to get attacked there from the right wing of the party. Look, let's not forget, it was only a few months ago that there was a curfew put on the right wing of the Labour Party, the memberships, that disallowed branches to meet in the run-up. They weren't allowed to meet, they weren't allowed to discuss issues, and that went on for months. That itself is something you would read out of Mein Kampf. This is the attempts to undermine people within the left.
That's a bit of a stretch. That's a bit of a stretch, isn't it? To make a comparison with Mein Kampf there.
Well, the attempts to undermine was a curfew. And
there's nothing going on. There's nothing, Harry, there's nothing going on in British politics comparable to the strategies of Mein Kampf.
Well, look, it's a curfew.
It demeans what happened in the Holocaust, doesn't it, to even make that reference?
Right. What democratic society imposes the full restrictions on party branches and members from meeting?
Well,
and that's the extent of what,
Well, Harry needs to accept that actually what has happened in large swathes of the country. I saw a documentary last night I watched about in Brighton and Hove. What has happened in large swathes of the country is that there has been a form of entryism, and Momentum is in the spearhead of that, whereby far left people who belong to groups like the Alliance for Workers' Liberty and the Socialist Party and various other ragbag elements that would be nowhere near power in this country have infiltrated the Labour Party, are using the Labour Party as a host for their particular brand of politics, and are presently threatening sitting Labour MPs with deselection if they don't conform to the Corbyn-esque Ken Livingstone worldview. Her Majesty's opposition has been taken over by people who adhere to a particularly virulent hatred of the State of Israel and
they would deny that. Of course they would deny that and say they have criticisms to make. But I have to say that they're not here to speak for themselves. Christopher, thank you very much. Christopher Stolford from the DUP. Douglas Murray from The Spectator in our Westminster studio. Thanks. Good to talk to you again, Douglas.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.